أنا ماسك الراية بعدك يا سيدي ترى.
الله يعزك الله يعزك، والله تشرفك.
فما أدري أنا أبدأ الآن ولا إيش أسوي عشان أعرف أنا كيف التنظيم، لأنه أنا ماسك إدارة السيشن.
خلاص عين
تفضل
عندك.
بروفيسور رائد، تفضل
أبدأ
السيشن
الآن.
القادم. نعم تفضل.
الله يعطيك العافية. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. طبعا أرحب بكم في المؤتمر الخليجي المنعقد في دولة الكويت تحت رعاية معالي وزير النفط الأستاذ الدكتور محمد الفارس، وأشكر طبعا الأستاذة هنادي المبارك على حسن يعني يعني تنظيمها لهذا المؤتمر الجميل، وأدعوها كمان مع أننا مقدم إلى مؤتمرات متخصصة إن شاء الله في الاختراعات. هنبدأ إحنا الأول طبعا سيشن مع الدكتور محمد الموسوي في البورد ممبر اوف بحرين ديفلوبمنت سوسايتي، فليتفضل مشكورا من دولة البحرين في أول توكس. تفضل.
دقيقة من فضلك بس عزيز.
تفضل يا سيدي. طبعا إذا الآن نحن طبعا بالنسبة للمؤتمر هذا مع الأستاذة هنادي، طبعا احنا نشكرها على تنظيمها للمؤتمرات هذه، طبعا هذه المؤتمرات الجميلة التي تنمي يعني الفكر الابتكاري والاختراعي في عدة مجالات. طبعا احنا يعني ندعو إلى مؤتمرات يعني براكتيكال. أنا صحيح إني أستاذ جامعي، فأنا أدعو إلى مؤتمرات براكتيكال ككيس ستاديز، عشان يتعلم الواحد إيش هو الاختراع وكيف سجله وكيف طريقة تسجيله، how to have يعني to solve this idea. يعني أكيد حيمر بمشاكل، خليه يتحدثنا عن طريقة المشكلة وكيف حلها. أنا يعني دائما بدرس في الطب إنه المشكلة إيش بتصير وكيف حلها، وطبعا يعني هذا من الأشياء اللي بتنمي الفكر الإبداعي والابتكاري عند الناس. وأدعو الطلاب، يعني طلابنا، أنا طبعا أنا من الناس اللي بدرس الطلاب المشاركة في هذه المؤتمرات. طبعا عندي طلاب دراسات عليا، طبعا أنا دعيتهم إلى مؤتمرات قريبا إن شاء الله بإذن الله ندعوكم عليها. أنا جاهز ترى يا أستاذ محمد. معانا الأستاذ محمد ولا؟
معك عزيزي، ثواني بس.
تفضل يا سيدي. أنا ما تعطيني دقيقة أتكلم ولا أستناك؟ أنا تحت أمرك، أنا في عندي إمكانية أتكلم.
ثواني بكون عندي.
طيب تفضل يا سيدي. طبعا احنا السيشن هذا حيكون عندنا تفضل يا اخي. السلام عليكم.
اهلا وسهلا.
اهلا ومرحبا. تفضل يا سيدي، عندك دقائق يا سيدي عشان عندك متحدثين ثانيين.
طبعا اول شيء ارحب بالحضور الكرام. معكم محمد الموسوي، عضو مجلس اداره جمعيه البحرين لتنميه المؤسسات الصغيره والمتوسطه. اليوم راح اتكلم عن نبذه بسيطه عن تجربه الجمعيه في تاسيس الحاضنات وتهيئه رواد الاعمال من خلال هذه الحاضنات اللي تشمل تخصصات مختلفه، ومن بعدها ادماجهم في السوق المحلي ووضعهم في اطار المنافسه مع الشركات الاخرى في السوق البحريني والخليجي. خليني اسوي لكم شير ايوه.
عندك 8 دقائق يا سيدي.
طبعا بدأت فكرة تأسيس جمعية البحرين لتنمية المؤسسات الصغيرة والمتوسطة إلى يعني بدأت تقريبا حوالي قبل 12 سنة، عندما توجهت أنا مع رئيس الجمعية سعادة النائب أحمد سلوم إلى رجل أعمال فاروق المؤيد، وهو رجل أعمال معروف على مستوى مملكة البحرين، وطرحنا عليه فكرة تأسيس حاضنات لدعم المؤسسات الصغيرة والمتوسطة. طبعا هو رحب في الفكرة بالدرجة الأولى، وكان من بعدها الشخص الرئيسي لدعم هذه البذرة والمبادرة، ومن بعدها التوسع في إطار الحاضنات. طبعا مؤسسة طبعا جمعية الآن وصلت إلى حاضنات مختلفة في مجالات مختلفة، منها حاضنة إعلامية، ومنها حاضنة طبية وهي الأولى على مستوى الخليج العربي، وثلاث حاضنات أخرى بتخصصات مختلفة، إضافة إلى معهد تأسيسي إلى رواد الأعمال يدرسون فيه 14 مقرر قبل إنشائهم إلى مشاريعهم، بحيث أن يعرفون المهارات الأساسية اللي يتطلب أن تكون في أي رجل أعمال أو سيدة أعمال قبل بدءهم إلى مشروعاتهم الخاصة الصغيرة والمتوسطة. طبعا يعني أحد التجارب يعني كانت الناجحة بالنسبة لنا وهي في حاضنة بوابة الخليج الطبية، عندما ارتئينا أن في حاجة في السوق إلى تهيئة الأطباء الجدد، ومنهم أيضا أطباء محليين موجودين ولكن هم موظفين، بأن يكون لهم مكان ينفذ الهيكل الإداري إلى عياداتهم. كثير من هذه الأطباء هم ناجحين في اختصاصاتهم كأطباء، ولكن في طريقة إدارتهم إلى مشاريعهم الخاصة أو عياداتهم لا يملكون المهارات الأساسية. فقمنا بدعوتهم وتوجيههم ووضع الخطة العمل الواضحة إليهم، بحيث أنهم يكونون جدا متفائلين ومطمئنين بأن يبدأون مشروعاتهم. كثير منهم بدأوا أسسوا نفسهم وطلعوا، ومن بعدها خرجوا من الحاضنات. عادة عندنا في الحاضنات مدة 2 سنين هي المدة المسموحة من وزارة تجارة صناعة البحرين بالمؤسسة كتصنيف مؤسسة متناهية الصغر من ضمن الحاضنة، والتي تحصل على الدعم الحكومي والامتيازات الحكومية كونها من ضمن هذه الحاضنة. طبعا اللي حبينا يعني ننقله إليكم هو التجربة الثرية، هذه التجربة اللي بدأناها احنا في يعني أكثر من 10 سنوات سابقة، والآن توسعت في مملكة البحرين، صارت في عندنا حاضنات كثيرة ليست أيضا تحت مظلة الجمعية، تساهم في دعم الاقتصاد المحلي. وبدأت بدأ التوجه يكون في تأسيس هذه الحاضنات كمنصة لأي رائد أعمال قبل بدءه، من إيجاده إلى الفكرة المطلوبة لتأسيس مشروع التجاري إلى كيفية إدارته وتأسيس هذه المؤسسة التجارية بشكل كامل، إضافة إلى نقل المهارات التسويقية والحسابية والإدارية الرئيسية إلى رائد الأعمال الجديد في السوق البحريني والخليجي. طبعا يعني نود أن يعني نشيد بسوق الخليج، فهو سوق يعني يافع، سوق تخلق فيه فرص كبيرة لرواد أعمال، بحيث أن هم يجدون ويقدمون على تطوير نفسهم، فيحصلون على الفرصة المناسبة بحيث أن يطورون أعمالهم. هو سوق يحفظ حقوق رواد الأعمال من دول الخليج ويكون لهم الداعم الرئيسي في هذا الإطار. أستاذ رائد، كم
باقي لك 5 دقائق يا سيدي.
بعد 5 دقائق.
5 دقائق.
طبعا بالنسبة للحاضنات الإضافية اللي عندنا من ضمن الجمعية، هي حاضنة بروسكاي الإعلامية. كانت فكرتها بدأت من يعني بدء انتشار الوعي الإعلامي والتسويق الإلكتروني والسوشيال ميديا، وتوجه العالم بشكل يعني خاص إلى التحول الرقمي في المجال الإعلامي. فتم تأسيس هذه الحاضنة، وضع استوديو متكامل للتصوير والإنتاج وغيرها، وضع لجان متخصصة في الإبداع والابتكار، وضع الحلول ووضع الخطط إلى المؤسسات الإعلامية اللي تأتي من ضمن هذه الحاضنة، بحيث أن يكونون متميزين في قطاع الإعلامي والتكنولوجي. طبعا هذا كان له تأثير كبير على المؤسسات المتواجدة عندنا في الحاضنة، لأنهم كانوا سباقين في هالنوع من الخدمات. فمن السوشيال ميديا دخل في القطاع الإعلامي بقوة. كانوا هم لديهم الخبرة، لديهم الخطط، لديهم البرامج اللي يعرضونها على السوق المحلي، والتي حصلت على إقبال كبير في هذا الإطار. فكانوا يعني في أول كم من سنة من تأسيس الحاضنة يعني لديهم كمية عمل كبيرة جدا. وهذا مهم جدا في القطاع الإعلامي والتكنولوجي، أن يكونون المؤسسات متطورين وسباقين في طرح الأفكار وطرح الأساليب والحلول في هذا المجال. لدينا أيضا طبعا اللي هو يعني التجربة ناجحة في حاضنة فاروق المؤيد لتطوير الأعمال. طبعا خذينا فيها مجالات متنوعة، ولكن كان يعني المجال الرئيسي ولا أغلبية رواد الأعمال تم توجيههم في ذاك الوقت، واللي هو كان قبل تقريبا حوالي 7 إلى 8 سنوات، هو الطاقة المتجددة وخدمات السولر وتقنية السولر على يعني المستوى المحلي والخليجي، وتوجه الحكومات عالميا بإيجاد حلول وخيارات لطاقة متجددة لتوفير الكهرباء والإضاءة وغيرها. تم تأسيس كذا شركة في هذا المجال. هذه الشركات الآن يعني صارت معتمدة من قبل الدولة، وطلعت أصلا حتى من الحاضنة، وصارت تأخذ مشاريع بحجم ضخم يعكس خبرتها، يعكس مستوى أدائها، وكيف أن الحاضنة في البداية خلقت لها الجو الملائم الذي يدعم هذه النوع من الأنشطة، مع المتابعة المباشرة إلى رواد الأعمال من ناحية تطوير أعمالهم، ومن ناحية المشاكل اللي يتعرضون إليها من ناحية ممارسة أنشطتهم في السوق المحلي، وإيجاد الحلول ودعمهم كإداريين للحاضنة بين المؤسسات الحكومية بالتوجيه وبالمراسلات إذا كانوا يعانون.
دقيقة واحدة باقي يا سيدي.
نهاية أود أن يعني أشكر القائمين على هذا المؤتمر بإعطائنا الفرصة لمشاركتنا مع الحضور الكريم بالتجربة الثرية اللي مرينا فيها إحنا كجمعية بمملكة البحرين. ونشكركم جميعا، وأتمنى أن كان الهدف من هذا البرزنتيشن، والهدف من هذه التجربة مميزة وتعتبر يعني إضافة إلى الحضور الكريم، وشكرا جزيلا.
أشكر الأستاذ الكريم محمد الموسوي من دولة البحرين الشقيقة على هذا المحاضرة القيمة اللي شرح لنا فيها كمان على الحاضنات. يعني طبعا هذه من الأشياء المهمة في دول الخليج، عندنا حاضنات خليجية في السعودية وفي البحرين وفي الكويت وفي عدة دول خليجية. هاي طبعا أشياء تساهم في عملية تسريع الابتكارات والاختراعات في دولة الخليج. أشكر الأستاذ محمد الموسوي على حسن يعني محاضرته. وننتقل الآن we will go for second talk for the head functional innovation team, الدكتور شابينيز كابيتال from India, and he will have two sessions. He will give us two talks on two different manners, and he would be more than welcome to start his talk, please.
Thank you very much, Doctor. And my name is Srinivas. Namaste and good morning, good evening to all those people in different time zones. I am actually calling from Pune, India, and I have been a big fan of what you're doing in the Middle East. And I know a lot of things are happening, and the rate at which Middle East is moving is much faster than it's happening in other parts of the world. So great job done by you all. I'll just show my presentation, and my both sessions will happen through one presentation. So I hope you can see my presentation.
Yes, we already see it. And you have 20 minutes now.
Yeah. So I've taken a very important subject. I lead entrepreneurship within our company. Our company is called Tech Mahindra, which is a $5 billion company with about 140,000 people operating in around 90 countries across the world. So I lead entrepreneurship, ideation, and innovation management for Tech Mahindra. And I'm also responsible for collaborating with startups globally. So that's my role. And so entrepreneurship is an area of interest. So some of the points I wanted to see is that what creates a good entrepreneurship ecosystem? How do we actually enhance ecosystems for ideators? Now, the first and most important thing for everyone is to understand is that innovation cannot happen in isolation. It will need an environment. And the environment will need multiple things. It could be space, it could be mentorship, it could be connects, it could be resources, multiple things. So I just thought I'll do a random check to see how the world fares in terms of entrepreneurship. We've seen that some of the Western countries have actually taken advance lead. They have been in this field for 3-4 decades. So if you look and rank the top 10 ecosystems in the world, you will see that you'll have US, UK, Israel, Canada, Germany, Sweden, China, Switzerland, Australia, and Singapore. But very good thing to see is that in the top 25 countries, you also have UAE, which has really progressed well in this field of startup ecosystem. Similarly, the way the countries have progressed, you will also have the top 10 cities in terms of ecosystem. We've seen India pushing a lot in the ecosystem arena. Now, one of the measures in which these cities are ranked are how many number of startups are actually incubated. What is the number of people working there? How many jobs are created? What is the IP that is created out of that? And how many unicorns have actually been developed? How much commerce has happened? So I was just doing a check of how many unicorns have actually happened. And I'm very happy to see that a lot of unicorns now also come from the Middle East and Africa. You have 11 from Israel, you have 2 from UAE, you have 1 unicorn from Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, you have 2 from South Africa. So this entire belt of Middle East and Africa has seen a lot of entrepreneurship happening. We ourselves are directly connected with major colleges in Oman. We are working on upskilling and doing entrepreneurship. We're working with the government of Bangladesh. We're working with some of the groups in Saudi to spur up fintechs in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. So I think a lot of work happening in Middle East, and this was just to give a ranking of how the world looks at. Now, for creating an entrepreneurship ecosystem, we need to understand how does a startup function? What are the key stages in a startup? So if you look at startup, everything begins with an idea, as they say. Now, what happens is once the idea is actually agreed that, okay, this is an idea that we can take it forward, that is when the ideator will have a vision and mission. And the vision and mission will talk about when will they develop a prototype of the product, or we call it as minimum viable product. That is the next stage. The idea gets matured once it gets developed to a minimum viable product. And from there, it goes to customers. It could be in a freemium mode where it's given to customers for free. And then with feedback, the product goes through multiple iterations. And the final product, when it is done, actually gets to scale, goes to the market and generates revenue. So we see that whenever a startup is developed, there is a pre-startup, there's a startup and growth phase. And in all these stages, and I repeat, in all these stages, a startup will need an ecosystem. At different stages, the requirements of a startup will be different. So I was trying to do an analysis and read some of the reports on what have been the success factors for a startup. And if you look at those 5 points that I mentioned below, timing, actually, it's like stock market. Nobody can time it. But if you are able to time the product at the right time, you'll really make the buck out of it. Similarly, the right time seize. Do you have the right composition of technical people, of marketing people, of people who can lead the product? So you need different sets of people in a team. Do you have that composition? The third thing is the idea and the strength of the idea. The fourth one is a business model. Are you going to do it as a freemium model? Are you going to start generating revenues from day one? Or are you going to generate revenue through a different model like Facebook and all, where you're generating revenues through advertisements? And the fourth one is what has been the funding type? So if you look at it, there are different reasons for a startup to be successful. But in all these situations, they will need a support from the ecosystem to be successful. So what are the key components of a startup ecosystem? So if you look at what do a successful entrepreneur look for, okay, and what is that they are expecting from an ecosystem? So when an ideator comes to an incubator or an accelerator, what is his expectation? The first thing he wants to do is he would like to build connections. And when I say network, is he would like to connect with a lot of people in different sectors. People who can help promote his or her product, people who can actually give an idea of how this product can be taken ahead, people who can actually enhance the product, people who can mentor them on how to source funds, multiple things the connections help. And the connections will help for them to raise capital. And capital, again, has two components. One is money, which is pure play money or stake in the company. And the second one is the right resources to do the work. The third important thing is, after I have an idea and capital, do I have the right team to execute it? Do I have the right mix to actually do it? We have seen a lot of startups go bust after they have raised capital because they have been not able to execute. Fourth thing is, do I as a startup have the ability to take risk? As I say, risk begets rewards. And what is the right mix of risk that I should take? The fifth one is that, do I really have a product that has got innovation, or am I a Me Too product? Is my solution a product differentiator? And the fifth and the last 2 points talk about inclusivity, where do I have the right team? Do I have taken the right gender mix, right composition of people, right sections of society that can be represented in my team, so that the best of it can actually come and be taken to society. And the last point is, as my product keeps moving ahead and into the market, do I have the right mechanism to track how it's performing? Do I have the data to see how it's performing? What is the feedback? How it can be made better? So these are some of the essential components that that are needed for a successful entrepreneur. And the ecosystem needs to give all this for an ideator. One of the philosophies that we have in our company is called think. And when we say think, is that when we create an ecosystem or when we create a lab for startups, for entrepreneurs, we are saying that there are 5 different things that an ideator needs to do and the ecosystem needs to provide. One is give the team, give the ideas sufficient time to think. Are they thinking or only executing? As they say in a lot of large product companies, associates are actually allowed to spend 20% of the time to think. Similarly, are we thinking? Are we thinking? Are we actually strategizing? Are we thinking what's the next step? Or are we only in the executing mode? So the first thing is that we create an ecosystem where people can think, where people can brainstorm on their idea and come up on the variations and enhancements. Second is, are there hubs? Again, hubs is where people can get different sets of people. It could be technical people, it could be mentors from communication skills, from CXO skills, from soft skills to sales skills. Do I have the right mix of people who are assembling at one place, which we call as a hub or an incubator or an accelerator? And it can be done both physically or virtually, depending on in the situation that we are in. I is, as we keep saying, I, the individual, the ideator, is the most important thing because everything revolves around that person and that person's ability to carry the idea forward till the logical conclusion. And in that I itself comes that whether the person has an ability to not take no as an answer. Is that person having that attitude of saying that, okay, I might have so many rejections, but I'll get the right product and the right mix and take it to the right market. And then, as I said, the most important thing that an ideator needs and that an ecosystem needs to provide is that ability to connect him to the right set of people who can provide value addition to his product, to his or her product. So from here, I'll be talking about what we are doing in Tech Mahindra. And when we are doing in Tech Mahindra, the point I would like to emphasize is that we have realized the importance that that any company, any person alone cannot innovate. There needs to be an ecosystem to flourish innovation. Whether it is in a company or in a country, there has to be a culture of innovation that has to be developed. So where we started this within a company, we got about 140,000 people, where we said that there will be an ideation platform on which people can throw in ideas, and the best ideas will get rewarded. And some of the best ideas with the best business plan will actually be incubated as a startup within Tech Mahindra. So today we have about 4 startups who are working with us in different areas like wellness, in different kinds of grids that we work on, smart grid as a service, in creating different engines for customer preferences and other solutions that we are creating. So what we've also done is that when we created this ecosystem, we created an ecosystem of startups and top academic institutions across the globe. So like we connected with some of the universities in Oman and UAE, we connected with universities in Australia. So by doing that, what we have done is that across the world, we've created a kind of a labs, or which you can call it as incubators, where people can actually come and dirty their hands in the vicinity of mentors who can help them with technology. And there are university students who are working with us at multiple labs that we have, whether it is in Tokyo or Munich, and they are helping with, they are working with us to develop solutions that can be taken to the global markets. A similar thing that we did for the country of Bangladesh, where Tech Mahindra helped the Bangladesh High Commission or the Bangladesh Telecom Ministry with identifying the top 10 startups after an hackathon. And we have mentored those top 10 startups for 1 year to actually taking their ideas into creating a POC, to helping the ideators with the CXO and sales skills, and also telling them techniques of how to raise funds. So that is the kind of ecosystem that we have built within our company. And the connects that we do with startup, we call it as a program called StartNet. Some of the universities that we are working with, I've already mentioned here, whether it's University of UC.
Professor, Doctor, you have 3 minutes left. 3 minutes left.
Okay, no problem. Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you. So that's what we've done, and I'll take the next 2-3 minutes to explain what's a StartNet program. So StartNet program is where we actually connect with startups across the globe, and the primary intention is that how do we do joint development? How do we create products that the market looks for? And once the solution is developed, can we take it to our 1,000+ customers across 90 countries? So the engagement with startups is primarily in the technology space, and in some of the startups, if the M&A team feels good, they could look at the option of investing. But primarily when the lab connects, it is with how do we develop a joint product for a particular market. So we connected with about 2,000 startups, 2+ startups across the world. 5 years back when I was in UAE, I went to the STP there and met some of the startups working there, and was quite fascinated with the work we've done. We also intend to go to Oman and Kuwait once when the things are relaxed, and to Kingdom of Saudi Arabia to see if we can work together in some of the fintechs and other space. If you look at how we do is there is a 4-stage process in which the startup framework works, where we actually discover the startups, curate them, define the business problems for us in the startup, design the entire solution, and then actually take it to the customer. So this is the policy that we've been doing with startups, and we've seen that the number of platforms that we have built with the help of startups and that we have taken to market. What we've also ensured is that since the startups are much smaller company to ours in terms of size and revenue, we've ensured that there's a very strong legal network to protect the startups IP and to ensure that all the revenues that we generate are shared as per the desired percentage or as per the desired milestones. So a robust framework is what we have within TechM. So just giving the example of what we do in our company, there might be a lot of companies which will be doing the same thing. The point that I'd like to enhance is that startups are going to disrupt these big companies, and it is our duty as corporates, as the governments, to ensure that each and every good idea from any person in that country or in the company is taken to the right logical conclusion. So that is the aim of creating an ecosystem. So I stop here with an intention and request to all of us to ensure that all these students have good ideas. We need to ensure the right way to evaluate those ideas and ensure that the best ideas are taken to the global markets. We never know where the next unicorn will come from. So that's all from my side. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Shafiz Capital, for this nice talk. And maybe we can have some questions if we have time after we finish with the next sessions. Session it will be with Professor Eric Stem. He is the Dean from University of School Economic from Northern. They are more than welcome, and we have 2 sessions to him to introduce us. He will have 20 minutes. He can start. You can start, Professor Eric.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's an honor and pleasure to contribute to this virtual conference. I'd rather like to be in Kuwait, but I'm sorry, I have to talk to you from Utrecht, the Netherlands. But I'm still going to talk about entrepreneurial ecosystems, something in which I have been involved as both an academic and a practitioner. I'm going to take you through a short journey of the science and practice of entrepreneurial ecosystems, and I have a little discussion on how we will apply this in practice.
Yes.
So without entrepreneurship, we would still be in the Stone Age, and a grandmother would not be able to Skype to her grandchildren, go online and pay with ATM, perhaps book a hotel via Airbnb and drink a very nice modern beer called Brewdog. Of course, we know that entrepreneurship is a very important mechanism to explain economic development. And you might know several of these firms, Adyen, Skype, Brewdog, but also Palantir, Airbnb, or Xiaomi if you're from China. These are firms that have grown very rapidly in a very short period of time and that have changed our lives, our daily lives. So without them, we wouldn't be able to communicate via Zoom. We wouldn't be able to transact via the internet. But we also know that these are led on the one hand by courageous people, but it's also happening in a particular context. And this context matters quite a lot in the prevalence of these kind of startups, scale-ups, unicorns. Here you can see the global map of unicorns in 2020. And we analyzed the prevalence of unicorns per 10 million population. And then you can see that, yes, Xiaomi is from China, from a particular region in China in which there are relatively many scale-ups and unicorns. Skype is a sort of a combination between Estonia and Sweden. Adyen is from Amsterdam, the Netherlands. Brewdog is from Scotland. And of course, many of these unicorns arise from the California state in the US. You can see that also the United Arab Emirates plays a role here, Israel, South Africa, India as well, but to a lesser extent, because of course India is a very big country, and also it's probably concentrated just in a few regions like it is in China, in which you only, if you would look at Beijing, Hangzhou, Shanghai, Shenzhen, then it would really be much more darker on this map. But if you want to zoom in, for example, on Europe, you can see that it's even more spatially distributed. So you can see here Estonia, but it's not the whole Sweden, of course, it's especially in the Stockholm area. It is also in a few regions in the UK. In the Netherlands, it's mainly the greater Amsterdam area. In France, it's mainly in Paris. So you can see that this is very spatially concentrated. Of course, this is very sort of skewed, elitist measure of entrepreneurship, unicorns. So these are firms that are valued with at least $1 billion before going public. You could also take a somewhat more democratic measure. So this is the Crunchbase database of startups, so that have had some venture capital or are likely to get venture capital. Then you can see the picture becomes somewhat richer, but still you see the very large differences over space. And that, for example, Estonia and parts of the Netherlands and for example, Paris is much more prevalent or much more fertile as a region for these kind of startups than other regions in France or Spain. That in itself, of course, is a nice sort of academic exercise, and also I think an interesting data to look at, because you then understand where these startups, scale-ups, unicorns are likely to emerge. But I think each and every region nowadays wants to have a sort of a systemic context that enables startups, scale-ups, and unicorn. Of course, we would like to copy Silicon Valley, but that is impossible. But also in Berlin, Stockholm, Amsterdam, and I also know in the Middle East and in the Far East, a lot of cities and regions want to stimulate startups. And the talk of the town nowadays is that we call this ecosystems. Of course, not like these pictures, but we get some parts of these pictures. So we understand that it's not just one element that needs to be changed in order to enable entrepreneurship. It's really a whole set of elements that you need to improve upon. And then entrepreneurship will flourish. That will also lead to economic development. Of course, you should come up with a definition, because otherwise you're just telling stories and you don't really give the opportunity to learn about this and to improve upon this. Together with a large set of scholars around the world, we are working on this, and this is a definition. It might not be the ultimate definition, but together with Ben Spiegel, we thought about this for a while. And we defined entrepreneurial ecosystems as a set of interdependent actors and factors. So just like a natural ecosystem, a lot of actors that are dependent on each other. And they're governed in such a way, so government means via leadership, networks, enabled by institutions, that they enable productive entrepreneurship. So we talk about productive entrepreneurship because you can also have entrepreneurship that is bad for society because it's environmentally harmful or leads to social exclusion within a particular territory. And it can be a nation, a region, or a large city. And this is not just a sort of an academic exercise. Of course, we also want to understand what explains why some places are more fertile for entrepreneurship and how you can improve each and every place in its own way. For that, we need to know how entrepreneurship leads to economic development. And luckily, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of academic studies that provide insight into how entrepreneurship is enabled that leads to economic development. For example, we know that talent is extremely important, but also investments in new knowledge, the accessibility of financial capital, the prevalence of intermediate services that make it easier to focus on your core business. The prevalence of networks that makes the diffusion of capital, knowledge, and information and people much more easy between different actors. And more fundamentally, you need to have institutions, formal institutions that work. So a rule of law, a contract law, etc., that you are sure that when you do transactions, they will also be safeguarded. And also informal institutions, so culture, a culture that enables people to develop their talent and to work together and also to pursue new businesses and new businesses ambitiously. And of course, we need to have a physical infrastructure in order to be able to shift goods and services and to move from one place to the other. And of course, at the end of the day, there should be effective demand. And especially these fundamental costs of long-term growth might be forgotten sometimes, but they are very important as a starting point to have a well-functioning economic system that enables entrepreneurship. And if you want to sort of summarize this into one picture, you might say there is this really fundamental formal institutions, culture, networks that need to be in place in order to make economic action in general, but especially entrepreneurship possible. And then you have physical infrastructure, demand, intermediaries, talent, knowledge, leadership, and finance. And we also know from a lot of academic research that these different elements are highly interdependent. So if you change one, that is not enough. You also need to look at how the other ones are moving. Are they also moving towards the same, in the same direction? So if you are going to invest in talent, you also would like to invest in finance and in leadership in order to let this talent flourish in your region or country. This leads to productive entrepreneurship. And of course, this can also lead to a positive cycle. So if you have successful entrepreneurs, they can become role models for a next generation. They can become mentors in networks. They can become venture capitalists or business angels. So they might reinforce the entrepreneurial ecosystem. On the other hand, if you have a lot of destructive entrepreneurship, that might do harm to the ecosystem and might lead to an even worse performing ecosystem. The good thing is that you might say, I think this is a little abstract. What do we do with this? Well, there's a lot of data around. We are also living in the age of big data. Of course, not every region and country has the same level of data. This is what we've done, for example, in the European Union, in 274 regions in the European Union. And then we try to measure all these elements. And some are really easy to measure. For example, physical infrastructure, which we measure the transportation infrastructure and digital infrastructure. We measure the different accessibility by road, railway, passenger flights, but also the digital infrastructure, which I think even more so after COVID, we know is very important. That is easy to measure. Some other elements are not yet good. We don't have the optimal measures for example, leadership. We know it's very important, but it's very difficult to measure. So we measure this with the number of coordinators on innovation projects per 1,000 inhabitants, which says something about the organizations taking the initiative to lead innovation projects in a particular city, region, or country. And you can measure this in every region. Of course, some regions have less data, then you need to rely more upon survey data, but at least you can use all this data to get to an index. And an index, you can compute this in many different ways, but at least we take into account the value for each of these elements. And if you are an average region, you get an index score of 10, which means 1 per element. If you're performing very well, you get a score higher than 10 here, for example, in the Greater London area, Amsterdam, but also in Copenhagen, Denmark. And if you perform below the average, you get an index value of lower than 10. So you see parts of Eastern Europe scoring very low, but also the south of Italy and Spain performing very low. This in itself, I would say, is not that useful. It gives you a first picture of what the quality is of your entrepreneurial ecosystem. And here you see it somewhat more in detail. So the top performing regions, as you would expect, perhaps if you've been in Europe, Helsinki, London, Stockholm, also Amsterdam, Utrecht. And on the bottom part, the Bulgarian regions and Romanian regions. We connected this index value to entrepreneurship output with startup per 10,000 inhabitants. And then we found that there is a strong positive correlation. It is not rocket science, because then it would be a perfect correlation. But we see if there's a doubling in the quality of entrepreneurial ecosystem, there's also a doubling in the currency-based output, so the level of startups in the region. And after a particular point, it becomes even more steep, as you can see here. But I think we are also here in a session with practitioners. You are perhaps wondering, what can I do with this? Well, I would say, just if you, when you go to the doctor, you would like to have a good diagnosis before you get a medicine. So before you start policies about improving the entrepreneurial ecosystem, you would like to have a good diagnosis. And I think we are working very hard together with practitioners, policymakers within Europe, but also in other countries and continents, to use this framework not only for thought, so thinking about how to improve entrepreneurial ecosystems, but also how to do it. And we can use a rather simple traffic light metaphor here, but also use the 10 elements and use all data that is available, and also relevant benchmarks. So if you are in Kuwait, you would like to compare yourself with the United Arab Emirates. If you are in Singapore, you would like to compare yourself with South Korea. If you're in the Netherlands, you would like to compare yourself with Denmark or with Switzerland. And then if you have the relevant benchmarks, you can compare your data, the quality of your ecosystem elements, as you see here, with the other ones, and then show whether what is the weakest link in your system. So that is red here. So talent and finance, this is one region in Europe, is below the average. You also have some strong links, but well, you should cherish this, but you cannot do much to improve, because there's a systems logic, which means that you're especially going to tackle the weakest links in order to let entrepreneurship flourish in your region. And you have some elements to perform on an average value, like intermediaries, leadership, culture, formal institutions. So this is a starting point. I would say entrepreneurial ecosystem diagnostics, and also endpoint of your policies, because also at the end of the day, once you have implemented policies, you would like to know to what extent these policies have achieved the goals that you envisioned to achieve. And just to give you a somewhat bigger picture of how this works. So here we have a sort of a live buoy, as we call the entrepreneurial ecosystem policy cycle. I would say, just as you go to the doctor, you would first like to have a good diagnosis of what is going on. What is the state of your entrepreneurial ecosystem in your city, in your region, in your country? And you can use these different elements and also the data that is available to show what is the weakest link in your system. And then that is just a starting point. I say it again, that is just a starting point for getting a better dialogue with all the stakeholders that are involved in improving the ecosystem. So that is a combination of representatives of all these elements. So bankers, knowledge institutes, schools, big firms that take leadership position, or public organizations, network organizations, governments that invest in physical infrastructure, consumers. And you would like to get with them in a dialogue, also with the entrepreneurs themselves, or whether they recognize these shortcomings of the entrepreneurial ecosystem, whether they can deliver more fine-grained local knowledge to get a better picture of this. And then in this dialogue, you should come to a policy objective. So say, well, this is really the weakest elements that we can do something at. So for example, here we are we think talent is even more weak than finance, and we can do something about it. So we're going to prioritize this. Then you can look around the world for what kind of talent are we looking, and how do we want to improve that? So what kind of policy instruments are we going to attract youngsters from abroad? Are we going to improve the primary, secondary education? Are we going to improve the connection of tertiary education, so universities to the business world? You can choose a policy instrument there, and then of course you need to implement it, which very often in an ecosystem setting is a combination of public and private parties setting up this policy and implementing it. And there very often it goes wrong. So you really need to look at whether the people have the capacity to implement that together with the government. And then at the end of the day, you're going to evaluate this. So you're going to use the diagnostics again to see whether talent has improved in a way that you envisioned. And perhaps it has, but not due to your interventions, but because the world has changed, because there has been a crisis, or perhaps other things happening. But very often it has not been achieved, and is it because your policy didn't work, you didn't implement it properly, or perhaps the diagnosis in the first instance was not good, so you should do a new diagnosis. And even in the happy case that you were able to achieve this improvement in, for example, hair talent, then you have to start over again with the diagnostics to see what is the next weakest link in the ecosystem. So this is a process. It's a collective learning process, which includes public parties, private ecosystem feeders, so to say, but also ecosystem users. And in this collective learning process with these diagnostics, you want to improve each and every region in its own way. So you start with a very context-specific diagnostics, but you want to get people together to improve it, to implement these improvements, see whether it works, and if it works, to tackle the next improvement, and if it doesn't work, learn why it doesn't work and how you can improve the policy. So this is really I would say, a science and evidence-based way to think about entrepreneurial ecosystems, but also to improve them. We've done this in many Dutch regions, in the UK, in Belgium, and we're also working on doing this in North Africa, in South Africa, and in Iraq. I'd love to hear about your experiences with improving entrepreneurial ecosystems in a way that is data-driven, but also very much stakeholder engaged. Having said that, I would like to thank you for listening to my presentation. There's a lot of more work to be read about this. Here's a short list of papers that has just come out, which you can download for free. And perhaps we can have a little time for a discussion or dialogue if the convener allows. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Eric, for this nice talk. And I would like to thank all the speakers today for the session 2, for the day 3 and symposiums. The next one will be Professor Femi Stephen. He will take care for the next sessions. Are you there, please? Dr. Femi Stephen from Nigeria.
Yeah, I'm here. Good day to you.
How are you? How are you?
I'm good.
What's the temperature now in Nigeria? What's the temperature? Is it very hot or is it hot?
It's very hot, and actually I just moved into UK. So
where? Manchester?
Manchester, yes.
Yes. You know the mile carry. You want to have mile carry where the restaurant. You know that?
I haven't visited that.
You will go there.
Okay,
nice
then.
place. It's called Have Mary.
Wow, noted.
Or restaurant.
Noted.
Now I'm giving you the microphone.
Wow.
You can take care for your session. Thank you, Professor Eric. شكرا للأستاذ محمد الموسوي. Thank you, Dr. Stephen Chivers, for your talk. Next one will be moderators is Femi Stephen. Thank you.